Hey there, language lovers. Shannon Kennedy here with the Language Hacking Podcast, episode number 8. In this episode, Benny, Louis, and I chat with Louisa, who we first met when she was learning Chinese in the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. Louisa joined the challenge to learn Mandarin Chinese because of her children who were learning the language at school and because she wanted to form a deeper connection to her heritage. In this episode, we touch on the Goldlist method for learning vocab and how the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge helped Louisa get out of the language learning slump she hit during night classes. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you want to look up any of the resources we talk about, you can find out more in the show notes at languagehacking.com/8. And one last thing. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. It really helps us spread the word about language hacking. Now, on to the interview with Louisa.
Welcome to the Language Hacking Podcast from Fluent in 3 Months.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Language Hacking Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Shannon.
Hello.
And we have a very interesting guest for you today. Louisa has actually been a very active participant in the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. And we have multiple reasons we wanted to talk to her today. But first, Louisa, do you want to give us a little introduction to yourself and your language background?
Hi everyone, so I'm Louisa and this is after my third challenge at the moment. Initially started in June last year with the first challenge. It was the Add One challenge, and I started learning Chinese. So the reason for that is a couple of things. So firstly, I always enjoyed listening to Chinese language and programs, but I never understood it. And also my background is, I'm of Asian descent, but my family moved to Australia, so we never really spoke Chinese at home. So my English is my native language, and I just wanted to be able to learn a second language. So that's the first one. And then the second reason is because my children are learning Chinese at school, and I wanted to help them improve their spoken language at home. So I wanted to be able to help by speaking at home and hopefully be able to improve their marks at school as well with their Chinese exams. And so this is my third challenge now, and I've enjoyed the progress through the challenges, and I've seen the progress. So that's why I've kept coming back.
What was your level when you did your first challenge in Chinese?
It was very beginner, basically. I had done perhaps 6 months of night courses 20 over years ago, and I forgot about that. So I basically started from scratch again. So I knew a bit of pinyin, so that helped a lot, so that I could learn a little bit faster. But the main thing is that I didn't know much. I just knew how to count and just to say my name, and that's really it.
So you said that in the past you did a night course and that you had learned some Chinese. Then I'm curious to know what some of the things you did in the challenge were that made such a difference in your progress with Chinese.
Yeah, so the night courses were a group of lessons at night, and they were different in that they were based off books and there was no speaking, just learning off the books. And I never spoke the language at that time. It was more learning just written in terms of English and pinyin. So the challenge is very different. So it's really based on listening and speaking. So it's a conversation at the end. And I enjoyed that aspect, and I found I actually improved more with that. I think language, you have to be able to speak it. There's no point learning a language if you don't speak it. So that's why I think the goals of this challenge, or these challenges, are really the crux of what language learning is about.
And I'm very curious to hear what your background was as you were coming into this language learning stage in just the last year or so. Because you would have had an interest in learning Chinese before then, I'm sure. So what would that experience have been like up until last year before you took this night class? And what do you think changed to really like light a fire under your ass to really kick you into getting into language learning mode?
Yeah. So I suppose I stopped doing the night classes because of work and just not having enough time. And I didn't have the interest to continue because I wasn't seeing any progress. I wasn't seeing any ability to be able to speak with other people in that language. But more recently, and then I had a family, and so that sort of was my priority. But then more recently, like last year, I was thinking with my children having to learn Chinese or learn a language, and chose Chinese. I wanted to actually help them because they didn't know how to speak it, and we don't practice it at home. So compared to their peers or their classmates who had a background in Chinese, and so they were speaking it at home, so they were at an advantage already. So I wanted to try and level it up a little bit and just to help them in school. Yeah, so that was my main incentive last year.
As a fellow mother who does languages with their kids, I'm curious to know what some of the strategies you use are to incorporate language learning into your family life.
Okay, so I think fortunately my children are a little bit bigger now, so I don't have to do as much for them. And we have like a routine now, and so they do their homework, they go to school, and I have a bit more time in that sense. So my routine is actually I prefer to study in the evenings. So after dinner, after I've done the cooking and settled them down and everything, and they're doing their homework, or after they go to sleep, then I do my studies. And I find that's the best time for me. So it's quiet, the house is peaceful, and there's no one to look after. So that's my best time when I study.
And do you think having the language at home, how does this change the situation where in terms of how you interact? Like, has it been a theme that you've begun to use the language with your children?
Oh, yes, from the time I started. So it's actually quite interesting. I started with using whatever I knew, and initially it was very basic and my children could understand. But then after a while, they found I could speak more than what they knew. And that was interesting. So they said that I knew more words than they did by the end of about 6 months or so. And they were surprised. But I think they're used to me speaking now. So I speak as much as I can at home with them in Chinese. And it's really just basic things, routine daily activities that we do every day. So they're used to that language now. And my daughter especially, she's very good. She will reply back in Chinese. My son, not so much, but I'm trying to get him to do it more. Yeah.
Going back to the challenge, I'd love to know what your favorite thing was about doing the challenge.
Yeah, my favorite thing was being part of the community. And I know a lot of people have said that, and it's true, because just getting that motivation, the ability to have the continual sort of support throughout the challenge is very, very helpful. And I think having you and Elizabeth as the community, as coaches, it's very, very helpful. And just making new friends or meeting new people has been very, very exciting as well. Yeah.
So if you were to, let's say you had the same process and you put the same amount of effort in to learning the language by yourself over each one of those 3-month processes, it's hard for a lot of people to appreciate what the community really brings to things, because they imagine learning the language, it's just studying words and sentence structures and maybe practicing that a little bit, and that's all there is to it. But like, what difference do you think that learning with other learners has brought to your experience?
Yeah, so it's made it more like a community of with people of similar interests, of the same interests. So we learn from each other, and I learn from others, and we can give support to each other. So if there are questions, especially questions, people ask questions all the time, and there's always someone who can answer the question. So if you're ever stuck with any question, not knowing how to do something or what language resource to use or how to go about doing something, there's always someone who can answer your question. I think that's the best, because otherwise in real life, without that language community, there's no one really that you can ask. And there's a lot of experienced challenges as well who have been through challenges in the past or have been learning multiple languages. And so they can actually give a lot of very good advice as well. And I think that's one of the best things about the challenge, is that you can ask questions, you get your answers, and you get progress because of that. You get supported because of that. That's the main reason.
With the community, it's obvious that it's helped you stay motivated to learn your languages while participating in the challenge. But I'm curious to know what some of the other things that you did to stay motivated were while you were studying Chinese as a part of the Fluent 3 Months Challenge.
Yeah. Okay. So I developed a habit. So it's more like a system. So it's with each challenge, there was an evolution of the things I used and what I did to try and keep it interesting. So the main thing is to have a system, whether it be I focused on things like speaking, listening, and vocabulary. So those are my main goals. And then this current challenge I'm doing, which is the third challenge, I'm focusing also on learning to write Chinese. So as long as I do find a system that covers these 4 goals each day, I'm quite happy. Even if I don't have time, I just do 2 of the goals and I just make it consistent each day. And finding something fun, something that keeps me interested in continuing each day. I think that's the main plan of attack that I use each day. Yeah.
And you've been so active in the challenge yourself that you've actually even become a language coach to help other people in their own challenges. So how has that been different to your experience learning it just originally as a participant without the coach aspect to it? And how do you think you've helped people with their own language challenges?
Okay, so it's a little bit different now. I'm not so focused on just my own learning, so I'm interested in how other people are going, and I really see the benefit of having that support. So I try and support the other challenges, especially the new ones, those who have trouble with the technology, for example, or have no idea what resources to use. So because I've been through it, I actually know what the process is and how they can find those resources, and I try and help them with that. And your second question?
Just mostly, how has it been different to see it from that different perspective as a coach? Like, what things do you appreciate now compared to when you did your very first challenge?
So I appreciate now the support I got from the past from Shannon and Elizabeth and yourself. So I appreciate what you've done. So I try and emulate that in my working now, in the challenge. Mm.
You said that as a coach, you're a little bit more aware of some of the challenges and things that the other learners are facing. So I'm curious to know, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've noticed, and what has your advice been to help learners overcome them?
Okay, so I guess everyone at some time have a challenge that's outside of this challenge. So whether it be social or family or work, so sometimes that can stop some people from continuing or reduce their motivation. So I find that so just by helping them, so trying to give them support helps, I think, and people also in the challenge have been quite open about any challenges that they're facing, and I think that helps the other challenges as well, to know that it's not just them, but everyone also comes across different challenges in life.
And one thing that we appreciate that you've done in your projects is how methodological you've actually been with your tutoring sessions. So I'm actually curious to hear a bit more about that, and especially how you organize your time with tutors. Like how it could, because as a busy mother, that's going to factor into things. Like how do you organize your time, and what kind of methods do you have in terms of working around your tutoring sessions?
Okay, so with the tutoring, I use the online tutoring, which is italki, and I try to book in advance, maybe a week in advance, and I find that helps. So that I have the set dates and times, so I try and work around those dates and times. And I basically just, if I know my schedule, I try and fit it around my free time or time that no other activities are going on. So I do about minimum one lesson a week, sometimes two, sometimes three. So it just depends on what my ability or capability is.
So when you're taking part in the challenge, one of the goals, well, the main goal is to have a 15-minute conversation in your new language, which for you is Chinese. And this is the Language Hacking Podcast. So I'm curious to know, especially since you were so systematic, what the 3 kind of hacks or activities that you did were to accomplish this goal and reach that 15-minute conversation.
Okay, so the first one is speaking. So it's more the lessons. So the live or online lessons on italki has really, it's the main ability of how I actually got to that point at 90 days. And then the learning itself is through podcasts, so listening. So lots and lots of listening. So I listen every day in the car or at home and during exercise as well. So that's the second part. And then the vocabulary I learnt, I like a method called Goldlisting. So that just means writing lots of sentences every day with the new words in them, and writing and just reading in those sentences. That helps me with the vocabulary.
And how have you adapted this newest challenge to work more around the written aspect? Because I know learning Hansa characters can be very complex, and usually people would imagine all that's going to be is just opening up the book and writing the character out over and over again. But how have you taken advantage of the challenge aspect and implemented that in your character studies?
So this challenge, I was more interested in the writing. So I asked your advice, and you recommended a textbook, and I'm using that now. And there was another challenger in a previous challenge who also used the same textbook, and he recommended that. So I thought, well, it should be a good thing to do. And with this textbook, it doesn't come with any pinyin or any sort of how to describe the characters. So I actually have to use another system, which is an app. And that actually is I find it's actually very good, combining the two to actually learn the characters. And I find that it's working quite well.
And as far as your 90-day videos, what did you discuss in the videos? How did you plan for them? And how did you feel that they came out?
So the first challenge, it was with my italki tutor, and she was really good. I found that I chose her because she was very patient, and she spoke very clearly. So that's one thing that's very important. And she knew my level, so she kept to a very sort of basic conversation. But we kept going, and actually we were able to speak for about 15 minutes. So I was quite surprised and quite happy about. The second challenge, I knew a bit more. I could listen better. So I actually had a couple of tutors. So I did the recording for both, and then I found that with one of them, she was speaking quite at a normal rate of speech, and I could still understand her. So I was also very happy with that one. So I chose that video. And I was quite happy that I had made that progress from the first challenge to the second challenge. I could see that I could actually listen better. I could hear, I could understand more. And even at the normal, natural rate of speech, I found that I could understand it, which made me really happy.
You mentioned previously that one of the tools that you were using was the Goldlist method. Could you kind of summarize that for us a bit?
Okay, so it's a method I've found in the first challenge that I did, and it's there's an explanation of it, a very good one by Lydia Makova. So she's done a very nice YouTube explanation. But it's basically a way of learning vocabulary. And it's, I think it just depends on the person whether they want or they're interested in this sort of system. But for me, I like the writing. So for me, writing helps me remember. And I like the system because you write down 20 sentences each day. And then every 2 weeks, you go back and try and remember those sentences and the structure. And these sentences include a new word or some new words, so that each day you learn the 20 new words or sentences. And I find that over time, it actually does build up. And I found also that I do remember probably about 60 or 70% of the words or sentences each time, every 2 weeks. And then at the end of it, you probably don't remember maybe 2 or 3 or 4 sentences at the end of the 6 or 8 weeks. But I find that's a good way of having long-term memory of remembering the words and sentences without actually going back to them in between those the 2 weeks. Yeah, before the 2 weeks is up.
You mentioned that your tutor and the goal listing method were really great resources for you while doing the challenges. What other resources have you found very helpful?
So besides also the podcasts I mentioned, and I guess just having the apps on the phone and using them as well. So things like the dictionary is very useful. I use it every day, as well as Google Translate. So I use that as also every day. So thinking about sentences, or if I don't know the words, I tend to type it into the Google Translate, and it will come up with a sentence. Although I have to be careful sometimes to make sure that it is correct. So I might ask my tutor or someone else.
So based on how your system has evolved over these 3 challenges, what do you think you would have done in the initial challenge that didn't work? And what lessons have you learned that have helped you do it better with each one?
Okay, so I think I guess it's been like an evolution. So it's just finding the best method that suited me, finding the things I actually enjoyed doing. And I find that listening to podcasts is probably my more interesting learning method. I have used some books as well, but not very often. So maybe once a week. So I don't use that very often. But the things I do daily is the podcasts, and weekly are the tutors. And then the character writing, I try and do that every day. And I try to set a goal. So 5 new characters a day. So I think it's more about having a system now. So I have I just start my study session, and I start with characters, five characters, and then after that I would probably go through a Goldlist or just go through some reading, and just reviewing what I've learned in the past.
Would you say that kind of a system, you wouldn't have had it as fixed as at the beginning? Like, do you think you've gotten into a better routine, or were there parts of the system that you felt you maybe weren't applying as well at the very start that you've improved on?
Yes. So if I didn't know what I liked or what would work, so I tried different things and different podcasts. That was the thing as well. There are so many podcasts available for Chinese, and I basically went through all of them until I found one that I really enjoyed. So I just chose that one. So it was mainly trying to find what I would like to use long term. And that took time, the first challenge, but I think it was well worth it.
You've obviously made really great progress as you've done these challenges, but I'm curious to know what things you still find challenging in Chinese.
Okay, so I think for me it's the listening still, especially when the native speakers speak really fast and they use more complex words. So that's the most challenging part for me. So I'm still working on that, and I would like to reach a higher level, intermediate level. And I think at the moment I'm still sort of between beginner and intermediate. sort of crux. So I'd like to reach probably B2 level if possible.
And do you have any big long-term goals in terms of maybe, obviously when it's safe to do so, to travel to China or maybe sit an HSK exam? Do you have any big ideas like that on the horizon?
I think I would like to do an HSK exam. I think that would be my next goal. In terms of traveling, that would be something else as well. So I would like to do that with the family. Yeah, so one day.
What are some of the best surprises that learning a new language has given you?
Oh, so the main thing is meeting new people. So learning with others, that's been very nice. I found that it's quite pleasant, actually. And just being in the same situation now with the social restrictions, that everyone is in the same boat. And it's quite interesting what people are doing in each different country around the world. So I think the social aspect there has been quite useful, given that we can't really go out and make new friends now. So this is the best thing now, I think, to develop some friendships and some links with other people, and just to be able to talk with other people with the same interests.
When a lot of people think about learning Chinese, one thought that comes into their mind is that it's the hardest language in the world. It looks like it's impossible to wrap your head around. How have you changed that perspective, and what would you say if somebody wanted to learn Chinese and felt very intimidated by it? What would you say to them to encourage them?
I would say start with just doing pinyin, because that's the easier method of trying to learn Chinese, and develop or getting the vocabulary. So I don't think it's difficult language to learn. I think the overall, I think the characters might be difficult, but there's actually speaking isn't difficult at all. The actual grammar of Chinese is quite simple, and it doesn't change. And even the speaking, even though there are tones, there's only one way of saying a word. Whereas in English, there are actually multiple ways of saying the same word with different accents. Whereas in Chinese, there's only one standard. The standard Mandarin is only one way of saying it. So it's actually quite easy. If you can get that, the tones right, you will be understood by everyone in China, in Chinese. So I think that's the easier language in that sense. And the pinyin itself is quite easy to learn. And it's only when you start getting into character writing and learning that you might find it a little bit more challenging. But the method that I use, I find learning the characters through sort of stories or pictographs. I think that really helps, just to help it to sink into to memory.
If you were to do the challenge again with completely new language, what language would you pick and why?
My next language, maybe Japanese or Korean. Yeah, so I like I find that the characters are very pretty. So I think anything that is pretty for me, I like to try and learn. So even the Chinese characters, I've always had a fascination with how to read those characters and how to write them. So I think learning it now, I find that it's not so hard. It's actually, there's a system, like in everything else, there's a system of writing it. And I think it's so pretty, and so I like the Japanese characters. I like the Korean characters as well. So that might be my second language. Mm-hmm.
Since this is the language hacking podcast, we always like to get an idea from people what their idea of language hacking is. So how would you define language hacking?
All right. So I think it's finding the simplest, easiest method to continue learning the language. And also the most interesting and fun method. So that will keep you interested in continuing. For me, consistency is the main thing. So if you're consistent in your learning, you will make progress. And I know that, if there are always setbacks, as I mentioned before, there's things that happen in life that can challenge that. So, but if you have that consistency and make it a habit, and having a system, then you will make progress. And I think that's the key for me.
To someone who is considering starting the Fluent 3 Months Challenge, what would your advice to them be?
I think that's a great thing. I think you will see progress. You will find people that are in the same boat as you are, and you will. I think you will enjoy it. Yeah, so you will see progress if you follow the system from day 0 to day 90. So as long as you have some sort of system you use every day, there won't be any problems.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you today. Benny, do you have any other questions you'd like to ask Louisa?
Yeah, I guess if you had any general encouraging words for people who are starting off to learn any language and would be either considering the challenge or even learning by themselves and feeling intimidated. Is there something you might say to them that now that you've gone through it yourself multiple times to encourage them as they're getting started?
So I would say if you're looking for a system, if you're looking for something that would get you motivated to learn a language and to be able to start off really well, I think the Fluent 3 Months Challenge is a great way of doing that. Because I think, as I said, speaking a language is the most important, and there's no other way of doing that except to, with a tutor, having online lessons or face-to-face lessons. But the motivation to continue with the challenge is the important thing as well, because you have to do the videos at day 0, day 30, day 60, and day 90. So you have to, you're motivated to actually show some improvement. You have those deadlines, you have the goals, and I think having goals is also very important. So if your goal is to speak for 15 minutes, you have to do that. So you actually get the motivation to do that, and you have the other language learners and the coaches to help you. So that is the best thing as well. So you're not by yourself, you're not alone, and you can always ask questions. You're always supported, and I think that's also one of the highlights of this challenge.
Thank you. I agree that if you are participating in the challenge, to definitely take advantage of the coaches that are there with you. They're there to support you. They're there to answer your questions, and they're there to help you through whatever motivations, dips, plateaus, anything that you may experience over those 90 days. So I really appreciate that bit of advice. Thank you for sharing that, Louisa.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and is there any other project other than your language learning one that you'd like to share with people?
No other projects, no. I think this is actually taking up about an hour or two a day. Yes.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and of course, the resources that you had mentioned, and obviously the challenge itself. If anyone's curious about anything about that, we'll have all of that in the show notes to today's episode. And have I forgotten anything to add to that, Shannon?
And if you're interested in taking part in one of the challenges, you can visit fluentin3months.com and click the button that says course, and you can find out everything you need to know about the challenge. And of course, if you have questions, you're welcome to get in touch with us.
That's right. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today, Louisa.
That's all right. Thank you, Benny. And thank you, Shannon.
Really appreciate your time. And to everybody else, I hope you found this informative, and I otherwise wish you very happy language learning with your own project. And we'll see you next time.
Happy language learning. Hey there, it's Shannon here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I loved the time I spent chatting with Louisa. Louisa shared how creating a system for her language studies helped her start making significant progress in Chinese. The key to the system is to be consistent in your learning. That means doing something every day. Things may happen in your life that make this difficult, but with consistent learning, you'll begin to see that you make big steps forward. Louisa's tips for staying consistent were to 1. Find a tutor that you enjoy working with. 2. Choose the resources you can turn to on a daily basis. 3. Set aside the time each day to work on your language. Consistency is key. And if you want help on this, why not join us in the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge, where you'll be coached by me and community coaches like Louisa. You can find out more at fluentin3months.com/challenge. Thanks for listening and happy language learning.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Language Hacking Podcast. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you found this episode valuable and want to help us out, please leave a review at languagehacking.com/review. The Language Hacking Podcast is presented by Benny Lewis and Shannon Kennedy and produced by David Sobel, with special thanks to the Fluent in 3 Months team. Theme music was written and performed by Shannon Kennedy. Find the show notes at languagehacking.com/podcast. Thanks for listening and happy language learning.